know that I'll be there.
Mechanism of vomiting. With the enterotoxins causing destruction and irritation of the intestinal lining, this activates the receptors present in the intestinal mucosa. The signal will travel via the vagal and sympathetic afferent fibers, stimulating the nucleus of tractus solitarius or the NTS. This will then activate the vomiting center located in the medulla oblongata, and then activation of the vagus nerve and enteric nervous system will occur. This will result to the forceful expulsion of material from the stomach and intestine in the form of vomiting. Mechanism of being unable to stand up. After ingestion of foods and water contaminated with Vibrio cholerae, these microorganisms will accumulate in the stomach. Because of the acidic environment of the stomach, some of these microorganisms will survive and some will not. Those Vibrio cholerae that survive will now be able to produce toxins. The enterotoxins produced will be able to cause destruction and irritation of the intestinal lining, leading to altered digestion and absorption. This will be manifested as weakness and inability to stand up. For the mechanism of dehydration. After ingesting foods and water contaminated with Vibrio cholerae, these microorganisms will accumulate in the stomach. Because of the acidic environment of the stomach, some of these microorganisms will survive and some will not. The Vibrio cholerae that survived will produce toxins. These toxins will bind to the G-protein coupled receptors. The binding to the G-protein coupled receptors will cause an inactivation of the GTPase. This will eventually cause an increase in the cyclic AMP and causing an activation of the ion channels. This activation will cause an influx of the sodium chloride going into the intestinal lumen. The intercellular water will exit towards the intestinal lumen, causing a fluid and electrolyte imbalance, eventually resulting to dehydration. Another mechanism when the intercellular water exits towards the intestinal lumen is that there would be an increase in the intestinal lumen water content. This will cause the stimulation of intestinal mechanoreceptors, leading to the activation of the enteric nervous system. This will cause an increase in the smooth muscle motility, leading to the increase in peristalsis. This will result to the progressive rice water diarrhea, eventually leading to dehydration.
The patient underwent fluid and electrolyte imbalance, which resulted into dehydration. The dehydration will result into decrease in effective circulating volume. Afterwards, the decrease in effective circulating fluid volume will result into decreased renal blood flow. Such decrease in renal blood flow will result into decreased renal perfusion pressure. The decrease in renal perfusion pressure will cause a decrease in the glomerular hydrostatic pressure, which will result into a decrease in glomerular filtration rate. Such decrease in glomerular filtration rate will result into kidney failure, and this will cause a decreased creatinine clearance and also decreased urea excretion. This is why the patient presented with increased serum creatinine and also increased blood urea nitrogen on the second take. The decrease in renal perfusion pressure will be detected by the granular cells, and this will cause a release of renin. Renin will cause conversion of angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1. Afterwards, angiotensin 1 will be converted to angiotensin 2 by ACE, and this will cause aldosterone release by angiotensin 2 and also the stimulation of antidiuretic hormone by angiotensin 2 as well. And this will cause increased water and sodium reabsorption and also decreased water and sodium excretion. This is why the patient presented with decreased urine output. Mechanism for increased estriol and progesterone to Vibrio accumulation in the stomach. At a pregnancy of 30 weeks, the patient will have increased levels of estriol. Such increased levels of estriol will reduce the number of CD4 plus and CD8 plus T cells. Aside from this, pregnancy will also cause increased levels of progesterone. Progesterone will result into the inhibition of TLR-induced cytokine production and also surface receptor expression. There will also be suppression of innate immune responses from the macrophages, NK cells, and also NFKB signal transduction. All of this will result into increased susceptibility to infectious diseases, which is why Vibrio cholerae will accumulate in the stomach, and while some of the bacteria are killed by the stomach acidity, Vibrio cholerae will still produce toxins. Mechanism for the S3 heart sounds. After a difficult delivery, there will be secretion of hormones from the pituitary, which is the prolactin, and from the placenta, which is the SFLT1. Such release in hormones will result into cathepsin D secretion from the cardiomyocytes. Cathepsin D will be responsible for the conversion of prolactin to vasoinhibin. Vasoinhibin will be responsible for the endothelial cell apoptosis. Such cell apoptosis will eventually result into peripartum cardiomyopathy. Eventually, the peripartum cardiomyopathy will result into heart failure, and this heart failure is manifested by the S3 heart sound. Mechanism for the dependent edema. As the patient experiences heart failure, there will be a decrease in cardiac output. The decrease in cardiac output will result into decreased stroke volume. The decrease in stroke volume will result into decreased effective circulating fluid volume. If there is a decrease in effective circulating fluid volume, there will be a decrease in glomerular filtration rate. And this decrease in glomerular filtration rate will result into less sodium being detected at the macula densa of the TAL. This will result into RAAS activation. The RAAS activation will result into increased plasma volume, which will lead into increased interstitial volume. However, recall that the patient has heart failure, which will decrease cardiac output, and this decrease in cardiac output will result into pooling of fluid in the lower extremities due to gravity, and this is what will cause dependent edema. Mechanism for fine crackles and breathlessness from heart failure. As the patient experiences heart failure, there will be an increase in left atrial pressure, and this increase in left atrial pressure will result into increased pulmonary venous pressure. Such increase in venous pressure will result into increased capillary pressure, and this will result into entry of fluids into the alveoli. The entry of fluids into the alveoli will cause pulmonary edema, and this is manifested by the fine crackles over the lung bases. The presence of pulmonary edema will result into decreased exchange of O2 and CO2 in the lungs, and what will result is accumulation of carbon dioxide in the blood. This accumulation of carbon dioxide will lead to breathlessness.
mechanism for obesity. The overintake of dexamethasone from 4 milligrams daily instead of 0.5 milligrams daily will cause iatrogenic Cushing syndrome, and in effect, it will cause increased levels of cortisol and cause the following: the overexpression of the enzyme 11-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 1 to increase corticosteroid production, and it will also cause a craving for comfort food, as there will be an increased expression of pentocannabinoids, and increased AMP activating protein kinase activities manifested by the patient as increasing the appetite for fats, along with the increase in corticosteroid. This will be manifested by the patient as having central fat rate distribution and increased visceral fat and altered adipokine secretions from the adipose tissue, all in all causing obesity. The mechanism for easy bruising, purple striae, and muscle weakness. The overintake of dexamethasone for 4 milligrams daily instead of 0.5 milligrams per day will cause iatrogenic Cushing syndrome, and in effect, it will cause increased levels of cortisol, causing the atrophy of the supporting connective tissue. It will cause connective tissue fragility and cause stretching of fragile skin. The apparent venous blood of the dermis will be manifested by the patient as purple abdominal striae. The atrophy of the supporting connective tissue will cause skin bruising and the thin extremities. Also, from the increased levels of cortisol, it will cause decreased insulin-like growth factor 1 and growth hormone production, decreased amino acid transport and the concentration of increased RNA transcription will cause increased protein synthesis, increased proteolysis of muscle fibrils in the extremities, causing muscle atrophy and manifested as muscle mechanism for facial acne. From increased levels of cortisol, it will increase androgen secretion, causing excess sebum production. This will cause occlusion of the hair follicle and will cause hydrolyzation of triglycerides of sebum by bacterial lipases. This will form glycerol-free fatty acids and bacterial metabolites. This will cause inflammation of hair follicles and accompanying sebaceous glands, and this will be manifested by the patient as facial acne. Mechanism for menses occurring every 4 to 6 months. The increased levels of cortisol will increase the androgen secretion and will exert negative feedback on the hypothalamus and suppress the gonadotropin releasing hormone. The follicle-stimulating hormone recognizing hormone will increase and will manifest as the menses occurring every 4 to 6 months. levels of cortisol will cause increased rank L synthesis. This will promote binding of receptors to osteoblasts. The increase of differentiation of osteoclasts will cause the mature osteoclasts to develop a ruffled border and release enzymes from lysosomes. This will promote bone resorption, and this will be manifested in the patient as osteoporosis or the decrease in bone mass.
Mechanism of oral candidiasis. With the increase in cortisol levels in the body, it can contribute to the impairment of neutrophil adherence to the endothelium. This causes the decrease in the granulation capacity and phagocytic action of neutrophils. This leads to diminished macrophages maturation, resulting to the downregulation of multiple pro-inflammatory cytokines. Eventually, this leads to immunosuppression. Therefore, where invasive fungal infection of opportunistic bacteria such as Candida albicans occurs, this can be manifested as oral candidiasis. Because of the increase in cortisol in the body, it would also lead to an increase in androgen secretion. This will result to an increase in terminal hair growth. This makes the skin being more able to retain testosterone in a more active androgen form, which is dihydrotestosterone or DHT. The DHT will be catalyzed by the enzyme 5-alpha reductase, resulting to an increase in hair growth. This is manifested as an increase in hair growth present on the upper lip and skin. Production and shedding of hyperkeratinized epithelium. Both the excess of sebum production and shedding of hyperkeratinized epithelium will lead to the occlusion of hair follicle. This will cause a proliferation of Propionibacterium acnes and hydrolyzation of triglycerides of sebum by bacterial lipases. This will result in the formation of, with the increase in cortisol levels in the body, it would also lead to an increase in androgen secretion. This will cause an excess in sebum production and shedding of hyperkeratinized epithelium. Both the excess of sebum production and shedding of hyperkeratinized epithelium will lead to the occlusion of hair follicle. This will cause a proliferation of Propionibacterium acnes and hydrolyzation of triglycerides of sebum by bacterial lipases. This will result in the formation of glycerol, free fatty acids, and bacterial metabolites, leading to the inflammation of hair follicles and accompanying sebaceous glands. This will be manifested as facial acne. Increase in the levels of cortisol, it also increases the RAN-KL synthesis, causing the binding of receptors to osteoblasts. This increases osteoclast differentiation, making mature osteoclasts develop a ruffled border and release the enzymes from lysosomes. These promote bone resorption, leading to osteoporosis or decrease in bone mass. This causes an increase in fracture for the patient, resulting to the compression fracture of the third lumbar vertebra. Additionally, excessive weight gain may have contributed to the compression fracture of the third lumbar vertebra. Because of the increase in cortisol levels in the body, it will cause the atrophy of supporting connective tissues. This will make these connective tissues fragile. Therefore, when these fragile skin are stretched, there would be an apparent venous blood of the dermis. This will be manifested as purple abdominal striae. Over-intake of dexamethasone 4 mg per day instead of 0.5 mg per day will result to iatrogenic Cushing's syndrome. This means that there is an increase in the level of cortisol in our body. This increased cortisol will lead to three mechanisms. First, there would be an increase in endocannabinoid levels, leading to an increased AMPK activities, causing an increase in appetite with preference for fats. This will result to central fat redistribution. Second, there would be an increase in crave for comfort food. This will also lead to increased appetite with preference for fats and will eventually lead to central fat redistribution. Third, there would be an overexpression of 11-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 1 enzyme, also known as cortisol reductase. This will increase the corticosterone in the body, leading to central fat redistribution. This will eventually progress to visceral fat increase and altered adipokine secretion, leading to obesity. When there is a high cortisol level in the body and the patient is exposed to stressors, it will increase the stimulation of catecholamines through the sympathetic nervous system. This will increase the excitability of nervous cells, leading to the increase in toxic effect of the excitatory neurotransmitters. This will result to neuroendocrine changes, leading to neuropsychiatric dysfunctions. In our case, it is manifested as emotional lability, bouts of euphoria and depression, and disturbed sleep. Because of the increase in cortisol in the body, it causes the inhibition of the production and secretion of insulin. It also causes the reduction in peripheral glucose uptake. It also causes the upregulation of gluconeogenesis, leading to the increase in endogenous glucose production. This resulted into corticosteroid-induced hyperglycemia. In our case, it is manifested as 3+ glycosuria. A slight increase in serum bicarbonate will lead to an increase in potassium excretion, resulting to a slight decrease in serum potassium. Because of the increase in cortisol in the body, it will inhibit the secretion and action of antidiuretic hormone. This will cause an increase in urine volume excretion. Minor mineralocorticoid activity, leading to an increase in renal blood flow and glomerular filtration rate, will also cause an increase in urine volume excretion. This will decrease the blood volume, leading to an increase in plasma osmolarity. This will stimulate the thirst center in the hypothalamus and will manifest as increasing thirst. Instead of 0.5 mg per day, will increase the adrenergic receptor. This will increase the sympathetic response, thereby increasing the blood pressure. In our case, it is manifested as a blood pressure of 180/110 mmHg.